Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the spirits of lost time, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Tonight's story is about moments that forgot how to move forward. It's about the quiet corners of where time doesn't quite work, where shadows still breathe from a world long gone, and where the air feels thicker as if it remembers something you've forgotten. We call them the spirits of lost time, but they're not ghosts, not in the usual sense. They are pieces of yesterday that never finished becoming today. In the land of clocks are strange things. Some still tick, powered by strange magic or stubborn machinery. Others are frozen, hands forever pointing at the second the world changed. You can find one in the husk of an old tower leaning quietly toward the horizon, its glass face cracked like a spider's web. Inside, dust hangs motionless in the sunlight, or maybe not sunlight at all, just a memory of it. No one knows when the clock stopped. Some say it never really ticked again after the Mushroom War. But if you stand beneath it and listen long enough, you might swear you hear it trying a faint, metallic heartbeat, echoing through the years. There's something peculiar about time in Adventure Time's world. It doesn't flow like a river anymore. It pools, it loops, it rests. The ruins of humanity sit quietly beside candy kingdoms, and ancient magic hums through the circuitry of forgotten machines. It's as if the world itself can't decide what era it belongs to. Somewhere between apocalypse and rebirth, time fractured, and what was left behind became something half alive. Finn, Jake, and the others walk among these fractures every day, though they rarely realize it. Each stone, each whispering breeze carries faint vibrations of what used to be. Sometimes when Finn dreams, he sees things that don't belong to him. A road stretching endlessly through a wasteland of rust, a child's toy half buried in sand, or a shadow crossing a skyline of buildings that no longer stand. These aren't visions of prophecy, they're memories, flickering echoes from the other side of time. The people who lived before the ones swallowed by the war left behind more than ruins. They left impressions, like handprints on glass. Moments so charged with fear or hope or love that they refused to fade completely. And when time shattered, those moments didn't scatter, they lingered, suspended in invisible folds of the world. That's what the spirits of lost time are. Not haunting the living, but haunting the moment they died. You could walk straight through them and never notice, unless something deep inside you, something ancient, still remembers how the old world sounded. Imagine for a moment standing in an overgrown city. The vines curl over what used to be skyscrapers, their glass turned to shimmering moss. You step into a room that hasn't seen sunlight in centuries. The air hums faintly. A chair sits slightly pulled out from a table, as if someone just stood up. And if you're quiet enough, you might hear a laugh, soft and brief, a laugh that ended long before you were born. That's not your imagination. That's a moment still happening, trapped like a firefly in amber. You just brushed against the spirit of lost time. When Finn was young, he sometimes wandered too deep into these places. He didn't always tell Jake what he saw, but he felt it, that strange, weightless sadness. A flicker of light, a scent of smoke, a feeling like he was being watched by something kind but far away. He would blink, and the world would return to normal. But for a heartbeat, he had seen the truth that was layered, that beneath its laughter and magic, it still carried the pulse of what came before. And maybe, just maybe, those who came before were watching too. Not as ghosts, chained by regret, but as echoes trying to understand the world their silence created. When Finn smiled when he helped someone, maybe they felt that warmth ripple backward through the cracks of time. Perhaps for an instant they remembered what hope felt like. The spirits of lost time do not speak in words. They speak in patterns, in flickering lights, repeating sounds, waves of emotion that drift through certain places at certain hours. Marceline once mentioned she could feel old pain in abandoned cities. She never said much more, but perhaps it wasn't just her memories. Perhaps it was the world remembering with her. Each note of her bass could be stirring the air around her, shaking loose whispers from ages ago. If you listen to Adventure Time's background, really listen, the show itself hints at these spirits. There are static distortions, echoes of radio transmissions, little glimpses of human speech warped and ghostly, as if the frequencies of the old world never stopped transmitting. They just became quieter, waiting for someone gentle enough to hear. That's why this clock, the one that never ticked again, matters. It stands as a symbol for every broken moment in Ooh. The moment when time sighed, when the future and the past both lost their direction. But it also reminds us that time didn't die. It just fell asleep. And in its dreams, memories wander freely, sometimes brushing against the living. Those brushes, those quiet, fleeting moments when Finn feels like he's seen a place before, are not coincidence. They are the dreams of time reaching out, whispering, "Remember me." And so in this world where candy people laugh and grass grows through glass, every hour is both new and ancient. The spirits of lost time drift through it all, unseen, patient, and strangely serene. They do not ask for release. They simply exist, like soft ripples in a pond that forgot who threw the stone. Time in Ooh has learned to hold its breath. And when the wind moves through the ruins, it sounds almost like an exhale. Sometimes when the night in Ooh grows unusually still, the air seems to shimmer with an invisible pulse. The trees lean just slightly toward it, the rivers hush, and even the stars appear to blink slower. It's as if the whole world remembers something at once, something heavy, yet beautiful. This is when the spirits of lost time are closest. Not as figures or shapes, but as a feeling that wraps around the landscape. They drift in the quiet between seconds, brushing past the living like cool wind over forgotten stone. Finn doesn't know why, but he's always been drawn to these kinds of places. He'll find himself wandering off paths, following the echo of something he can't quite describe. Jake teases him about it, calling it hero radar, but it isn't that simple. Sometimes Finn just stops, standing still, staring at nothing in particular. Maybe it's an old train track that leads nowhere, or a half-sunken billboard whose letters have long worn away. And as he looks at it, his mind feels soft and light, as though he's remembering a memory that isn't his. That's how the spirits speak to him, not through words, but through familiarity. They show him what time has forgotten. A window frame that still glows faintly at dusk, because once someone loved the view from it. A radio tower humming faintly beneath the breeze, still sending signals no one hears. A playground buried in ivy where the swing creaks by itself even when there's no wind. These are the places where lost time breathes, not trapped, just waiting. There's an old theory whispered among the few scholars who survived the reshaping of the world. They say that when the Mushroom War erupted, time didn't merely continue forward. It fractured, splintered into countless threads, each carrying fragments of the moments that perished. The physical world was rebuilt, reshaped by magic and mutation. But those temporal shards remained suspended. And now they sometimes overlap with the living world, like reflections caught between mirrors. When Finn steps into one of those reflections, he feels that strange déjà vu because, for a heartbeat, he's standing inside a memory that refuses to fade. It's said that these spirits can't be seen directly. They exist on the thin edge of perception, glimpsed only when the mind is half awake in dreams, in silence, in those soft seconds just before dawn. The people of Oo rarely notice them. They live full, bright lives in the present, their laughter and chaos filling the air. But every so often, someone will pause mid-sentence, frown softly, and say, "Did you feel that?" And then it's gone, the whisper of something that used to be. Princess Bubblegum has studied anomalies like this before. She's noticed regions where time runs strangely, clocks that tick backward, gardens that never wilt, echoes that repeat conversations hours after they end. Her instruments can't fully measure it. Sometimes when she brings her scanners to an ancient ruin, the readings flicker almost as if something inside the machines remembers their creators. She calls them temporal resonances, but Finn prefers the simpler term spirits, because to him that's what they feel like. Not data, not energy, but emotion left behind. Marceline, too, has walked through these spaces, though she doesn't need instruments to sense them. For her, the weight of the past is part of her heartbeat. She'll stand on a rooftop and hum a tune that once filled the world, her voice rippling through the quiet, and the air around her will grow heavier, full of listening. Sometimes she swears she hears faint harmonies joining in. Not ghosts, but memories of people who once sang beside her. They're not haunting her, they're remembering with her. There's something comforting in that thought, that even though humanity vanished, its feelings didn't. Love, fear, and hope left fingerprints deep in time's skin. And in the strange stillness after the war, those fingerprints began to shine faintly, like constellations beneath the surface of reality. Every time Finn laughs or Jake howls at the moon, those old echoes shimmer a little brighter, warmed by the life that came after. The clock that never ticked again still stands somewhere deep in the wilderness, marking the place where the flow of time faltered. If you were to find it, you'd see vines curling gently around its frame, their leaves reflecting soft, golden light. And if you pressed your ear close enough, you might hear a heartbeat, not of metal, but of memory, the pulse of everything that once was, still trying to find its way home. Some nights, when the moonlight passes through the cracks of its glass face, you can almost see the reflections move. Shapes of people standing where no one stands, hands reaching out to fix the hour that never came. But their touch fades before it lands, because in Oo, time has learned to hum instead of march. The people who came after the war, like Finn and Jake, live inside this hum. They breathe it, walk through it, and unknowingly carry its rhythm wherever they go. Every act of kindness, every shared laugh, every quiet moment beneath the stars heals another fragment of that broken melody. And little by little, the spirits of lost time begin to rest. But not yet, not fully, for there are still corners of the world where clocks stand silent and shadows replay their endless seconds. Places where the air feels thick, as though a story is still being told. And soon, we'll wander into one of those forgotten corners to see what time itself remembers. There's a part of the grasslands that no one really visits anymore. It lies beyond the stretch where Finn and Jake used to camp when they were younger, past the stone arch that once might have been a bridge, and further still where the grass begins to grow silver in the moonlight. The locals say it's just an odd patch of land, nothing dangerous, nothing cursed, but strangely empty. No wind, no birdsong, not even the chirp of insects. It feels like the world is holding its breath there. Finn stumbled across it once, long ago, while chasing a dream that felt like memory. He had been walking at dusk, following a faint melody that he couldn't quite place. It wasn't a song anyone was singing, more like a vibration, a tune too old for words. And then, through the tall silver grass, he saw it. A tower leaning against the horizon, half swallowed by the earth. Its structure was skeletal, rusted, yet it stood with a strange dignity, like it had been waiting for someone to notice it again. At its heart was the clock. The face of it was cracked, its hands unmoving, and beneath it, someone had carved an inscription into the stone. Here ends the hour that never came. Finn didn't understand what it meant, but as he stood there, he felt something stir in his chest, not fear, but recognition. The air was thick with quiet memories. He could almost hear faint footsteps echoing around him, soft laughter, a gentle voice humming a lullaby that belonged to no one alive. He took a breath, and for a moment the world shifted. The silver grass swayed with color, not green, but glowing, translucent shades that danced like glass under light. The sky flickered, and suddenly he saw people faint, flickering silhouettes, walking through the tower as though time had folded in on itself. They weren't ghosts in the usual sense. They were peaceful, unaware, still living inside their moment. One was carrying a lantern, another cradled a child, and their movements were gentle and slow, like echoes carried by water. Finn didn't move. He just watched. The figures passed around him, their forms half made of light, half of dust, whispering words that dissolved before reaching his ears. Then one of them paused. A woman, or maybe just the shape of one, turned her head slightly, and for a heartbeat Finn thought she looked at him. Not in fear or surprise, but with a kind of recognition, a soft, knowing smile. And then everything dimmed. The figures faded, the sky stilled, and the grass turned silver once more. The moment ended. He told Jake about it later, but Jake just nodded slowly, trying to hide the chill that crawled up his spine. Finn didn't know what to make of it, but deep down, he understood that what he'd seen wasn't an illusion. It was a moment, a piece of time, still alive. A world still playing the instant before everything changed. He had simply wandered close enough to hear it breathing. What Finn didn't realize was that these pockets of frozen time aren't rare in Ooh. They exist everywhere, beneath lakes, inside mountains, even in the air itself. Sometimes when a storm rolls in and lightning flickers across the sky, for just a split second, the world seems to double one version, bright and alive, another shadowed and ancient. That's the echo of lost time brushing against the present, trying to align. For reasons no one fully understands, Finn seems to attract these alignments. Perhaps it's his human soul, a spark of the old world that once was resonating with its own reflection. Or maybe it's simply because he listens. When Finn returned to the clock tower months later, it hadn't changed. The inscription was still there, but the air around it felt softer, warmer somehow. He placed his hand on the stone, and for an instant, he thought he felt a pulse slow and steady, like a heartbeat made of time itself. He smiled, whispering something only the ruins could hear. "You're not forgotten." And somewhere within the cracks of that silent tower, the faintest hum answered back. It wasn't words, it wasn't even sound, just a vibration that rippled through the grass, through the air, through Finn's chest, and then was gone. But that was enough, because maybe that's what the spirits of lost time needed all along, not rescue, not release, but simply to be remembered. Elsewhere, in the deep forest beyond the Candy Kingdom, there's a pond that never reflects the present. When you look into it, the surface doesn't show you. As you are, it shows you as you were, or might have been, or once dreamed to be. Some believe it's another fracture of time, holding images from forgotten days. Others think it's the world's way of dreaming. Finn once looked into it and saw himself older, weary but smiling, surrounded by friends who felt like memories instead of people. He blinked, and the image rippled away. When he told Bubblegum, she called it temporal displacement phenomena, but Finn preferred to think of it as the pond remembering him before he even existed. You see, in Ooh, memory and existence blur. When something is loved deeply enough, a place, a person, a moment, it doesn't disappear when time moves on. It lingers, softly, until someone else loves it again. That's what connects Finn to those echoes. It isn't science, it's empathy. The same empathy that lets him see monsters as lonely and ruins as homes waiting to be remembered. Every step he takes across that fractured land is a gentle awakening, not just for the world, but for the past still sleeping beneath it. Each act of kindness is a clock tick, a tiny click in the heart of history. The more he lives, the more those frozen seconds begin to thaw. And slowly, piece by piece, the time that stopped begins to dream again. There's a comfort in knowing that even the stillest things have hearts, that even the pieces of time that stopped moving can still dream. The tower where Finn found that silent clock is now surrounded by soft, flowering vines, delicate blue blossoms that only open at twilight. Some travelers say they can hear faint chimes carried on the wind when they pass by, as though the tower itself is sighing in its sleep. It doesn't feel haunted anymore. It feels peaceful, like something that was finally understood. Finn visits the place sometimes. He doesn't go to hunt for ghosts or answers, but simply to sit. Jake comes too, though he pretends he's just there for the view. They bring snacks, maybe a blanket, and they sit beneath the broken clock as the sky turns gold and purple. Sometimes they talk, sometimes they don't. There's a stillness there that wraps around them like a soft blanket, not empty but full of quiet presence. Every sound, every breath seems to echo a little longer, as though the air itself wants to remember. It's strange how Ooh can hold so much life and loss at once. Everywhere you look, you see the contrast, an old machine turned into a bird's nest, a crater now filled with glowing flowers, the ruins of a city transformed into a forest cathedral. And beneath it all, the pulse of those forgotten moments hums faintly, like a background melody. Finn doesn't fully understand it, but he can feel it, that everything that ever happened is still here, folded gently into the present. Nothing truly vanishes in Ooh. It only changes shape. Some say this strange blending of times is what makes the land of Ooh so magical. When the Mushroom War tore through the world, time fractured, but instead of dying, it learned how to dream. It became softer, more fluid, capable of holding memories like water holds reflections. The past, present, and future now ripple together, creating the strange beauty that fills every corner of the world. The Candy People may not realize it, but when they dance in the streets or celebrate under the stars, they're dancing on the echoes of ancient cities. Their joy warms the shadows that once shivered in silence. Every laugh is a small light that travels backward as much as forward. Even the Ice King, or Simon as he once was, carries these echoes inside him. His memories drift through time like snowflakes, melting and reforming in endless cycles. Sometimes, when his madness quiets, he hums old tunes without knowing why. Those songs don't just come from his mind, they come from the lost time itself, from the moments still orbiting around him. He is both a survivor of the past and a vessel for it, one of the few who can hear the spirits clearly. In his sorrow he speaks to them, and they answer through the shifting winds that dance around his crown. And then there's Marceline. She carries the weight of centuries, but she never lets it grow heavy. Her music bridges every era of the human world, the war, the rise of Ooh, and when she plays, even the ruins listen. There are stories that say some of her songs have awakened places that had been asleep for ages. A flickering streetlight that suddenly glowed after centuries of darkness. A tree that began to bloom out of season. Small signs that the spirits of lost time are stirred by memory and melody. Maybe that's what music really is in Ooh, the language that time never forgot. Finn once asked her if she thought the old world missed them. She smiled faintly and said, "I think it remembers us, the way we remember dreams, not perfectly, but kindly. That answer stayed with him for years, because maybe that's the truth of the spirits of lost time. They aren't trapped or lonely. They're simply remembering the way the world remembers everything softly, endlessly, like waves brushing the shore of now. When the night falls over the grasslands, the tower stands in silhouette, its broken clock face reflecting the moonlight. The air around it hums gently, steady as breath. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the ticking again, not from the gears, but from the heartbeat of the world. Tick, not a metal but a memory. Tick, not forward or backward but inward. A rhythm that says, we're still here. Finn doesn't visit as often anymore, but when he dreams, he sometimes finds himself there again. He sits beneath the silent clock, watching the stars drift like slow-moving embers, and he knows he isn't alone. The spirits of lost time linger nearby, not to frighten, not to guide, but simply to share the quiet. They exist in that soft balance between remembering and resting. And in those dreams, Finn feels it, the gentle warmth of the old world, the quiet pride of the new, woven together in still harmony. The clock may never tick again, but maybe it doesn't need to, because time in Oo has already learned the most peaceful thing of all, how to sleep while dreaming. And so the tower stands, the vines breathing softly round it, the silver grass swaying under the moon. Somewhere in that silence, the world hums its lullaby, a song without beginning or end, where every second is a memory, and every memory a heartbeat. The spirits of lost time drift through it all, their stories blending with the wind, their presence as light as breath. And if you close your eyes, you can almost feel them, the tender pulse of moments that never truly passed. Far below the sleeping hills of Oo, beneath roots and rivers and layers of earth that have forgotten sunlight, there are places the world no longer remembers. They rest in the quiet, dark cities that once shone with human life, now hushed under centuries of soil and silence. These are not ruins in the usual sense. They are dreams the earth chose to keep for itself, the cities beneath the silence. If you were to descend into those depths, through collapsed subway tunnels and crumbling corridors, you would notice something strange. The air there doesn't feel abandoned. It feels listening. Every footstep seems to echo longer than it should, as if the sound is being carried by invisible ears. When a drip of water hits metal, it doesn't fade away. It ripples softly through the hollow space, bouncing through time like a whispered secret. These are the breathing chambers of lost humanity, and the spirits of lost time, those same echoes that Finn brushed against on the surface, dwell here in deeper forms. No one knows how far these underground cities reach. Some say they span continents built by human hands in their final years before the Mushroom War. Others believe they were part of the great shelters, safe havens that never truly opened. But when the world above was torn apart, the clocks of these places stopped mid-motion. Elevators froze between floors, lights flickered and burned into dim amber, and doors sealed themselves forever. And the moments trapped within them, the fear, the hope, the heartbeat of entire lives, began to hum in the silence. Over centuries, the spirits of those moments grew faint, but not gone. They blended with the hum of machinery, with the quiet movement of underground rivers, with the sighing breath of the planet itself. They became part of the world's memory, living ghosts, not of people, but of time itself. There's a story Marceline once told Finn. She said that when she was little, before she met Simon, before she even knew the name of the sun, she wandered into a place like that. It was a long tunnel lit by tiny, flickering bulbs, each one humming softly, their light golden and tired. The floor was made of metal plates, and every step rang like a faint chime. She didn't remember walking far, but she remembered the feeling that someone somewhere was still walking beside her. Not close enough to see, but near enough to feel the air move. She never found anyone. But she said that as she stood there, she heard a voice not speaking, not calling her name, but remembering her, as though the tunnel itself knew who she was. Maybe that was just her imagination. Or maybe the world remembered her father's footsteps, a vampire king who might have walked those corridors long ago when they were still bright with life. Either way, the sound she heard was the same pulse that fills every forgotten city beneath the silence. It is the pulse of memory that refuses to fade. When Finn and Jake once explored a cave system, searching for treasure, they found a rusted door unlike any they had ever seen. It wasn't magical or runic. It was made of old human steel covered in moss and symbols that had lost their meaning. When they finally managed to pry it open, the air that poured out wasn't stale. It was warm, heavy, and faintly humming. Inside was a vast chamber walls lined with empty consoles, a massive screen cracked, but still faintly glowing with static. On the floor lay toys, scattered papers, a mug turned on its side, and a single skeleton sitting upright in a chair, its hands still resting on the controls. Finn didn't speak for a long time. There was no danger, no ghost, no monster. But there was a weight in the room, the feeling that the moment had never really ended. The screen flickered once, and then a sound came through. A quiet, distant voice repeating something soft and melodic, too garbled to understand. Jake turned the machine off, but the sound kept going faint, like it was echoing from inside the walls. They left soon after, but Finn kept thinking about it. The idea that somewhere beneath his feet, entire worlds of memories were still replaying themselves, unseen and unacknowledged. Every hum of the ground, every soft vibration beneath ooh, could be the echoes of a city dreaming in silence. Princess Bubblegum has long known of these underground chambers. She's studied them from afar, though even her instruments can't reach their deepest layers. She once said, "The past didn't vanish, just went quiet." That quiet is what ooh was built on, a silence so vast that new life could bloom without ever truly erasing the old. The Candy Kingdom's foundations rest on ancient towers and highways, forgotten structures that still hum faintly beneath the soil. Every now and then, something from below surfaces, a piece of metal shaped like a human face, a shard of glass that glows when touched, or a soft tone that rings from nowhere and fades just as quickly. The people of Ooh don't think much of it. To them, it's just another mystery, another fragment of magic. But Finn knows better. He's seen the look in those silent halls. He's felt the warmth of forgotten moments, still pressing softly against the walls, asking to be remembered, not loudly, not urgently, but gently, like a song sung from another room. The cities beneath the silence are not haunted by tragedy. They are cradled by it. They have become the heartbeat of the world's memory places where time curls up to sleep. As the centuries turned, those buried cities began to breathe in rhythm with the surface world above them. They were no longer separate, the weight of mountains and forests pressed down like blankets, and life, unknowingly, began to root itself into their bones. Moss crept through the cracks of ceiling vents, roots split through glass and tile, and underground rivers carved soft paths through rooms that had once been filled with light. The old world was dissolving, but not dying. It was transforming into something gentler. Sometimes, late at night, when the winds of Ooh fall still and even the stars seem to be listening, a low hum rises from beneath the earth. Those who have heard it say it sounds almost like a lullaby, deep and distant, as though the planet itself is remembering a melody it once knew. Marceline once told Finn that she thought those sounds were just pressure shifts in old metal. But then, with a quiet smile, she admitted, Or maybe they're dreams. Dreams the world still hasn't finished having. It's a haunting thought that the world could dream of its own past. But perhaps that's exactly what these cities beneath the silence are doing. They dream of elevators that still wait for power, of streets filled with voices, of laughter echoing through wide atriums that are now dark and filled with water. They remember sunlight glinting on glass towers, footsteps on tiled floors, and the hum of machines that once promised a future. And in those dreams, the spirits of lost time drift slowly, not bound to bodies, but to seconds that never completed themselves. One such spirit is said to linger beneath what used to be the great human capital, though few remember that name now. In the days before the war, it was the heart of humanity's final age of wonder, filled with light and sound, music and movement. When the bombs fell, the surface was obliterated, but far below the foundations endured a labyrinth of sealed corridors, its power fading but never extinguished. Inside, time folded in on itself. It didn't stop, but it looped like a record spinning endlessly on a single note. That's what gives the place its strange quality. Visitors have reported hearing echoes that don't match their own steps, seen flickers of movement in the corner of their eyes, silhouettes dressed in strange old clothes, walking paths that no longer exist. It's not that they're ghosts. It's that the moment is still there, repeating softly. An endless replay of life that never realized it had ended. When the world changed, so did these echoes. As ooze magic seeped into every stone and shadow, the memories began to take on form, shimmering outlines, whispering shapes, fragments of feeling that occasionally drift upward through the cracks. Some of the strange phenomena that people once called spirits or hauntings might actually be these remnants of old-time surfacing. A flicker of light that lingers too long in the forest. A song that plays from a broken machine. A name whispered on the wind, even though no one remembers it. Finn once came across something like this in an ancient subway shaft, a metal tunnel lined with strange lights that flickered when he walked past. He heard a voice calling faintly through the static of an old speaker system. It wasn't a voice of warning or distress. It was simply speaking, reciting words from some forgotten broadcast. Weather reports, maybe, or old instructions. But the longer he listened, the more the words seemed to change. They began to form sentences that almost felt personal, answering questions he hadn't asked, murmuring fragments of dreams. Jake told him it was probably just interference, but Finn couldn't shake the feeling that the voice wasn't just speaking to him, it was remembering him, as though the system had once recorded the echoes of a boy long ago and was finally playing them back. And this, perhaps, is the strange truth of those hidden cities. They don't just remember what was, they remember what could have been. Moments that nearly happened, choices that almost existed, futures that were never allowed to bloom. All of them folded together beneath the silence, humming faintly in the dark. The air in those tunnels carries not just the past, but a soft ache, the ache of unspent time. Princess Bubblegum theorized that this energy might be responsible for certain anomalies on the surface, strange pockets of distorted reality, where the flow of time feels slower, or where echoes of long-gone voices can still be heard. She called it temporal residue, though Finn preferred calling it ghost time. He said it felt less like a science and more like a feeling a sigh from the earth trying to tell its story. And so, as ooh thrives above, full of laughter and light, the cities below still hum their steady tune, soft, patient, unending. Every vibration, every faint mechanical sound carries a memory of what once was. They are the world's quiet heartbeat, the gentle reminder that nothing truly disappears. It only settles deeper, waiting to be dreamed again. Over the years, there have been travelers brave or foolish enough to wander into those depths, seekers, scavengers, dreamers who followed faint lights through cracks in the ground. Most never find their way back. Those who do return are changed in quiet ways. Their eyes drift when they speak, as if they're listening to something no one else can hear. They talk about staircases that lead to nowhere, trains that still hum beneath the earth even though no track remains, and long corridors where every shadow seems to move just slightly out of rhythm. But what unnerves them most is not fear, it's gentleness. The silence down there is not empty, it's tender. It holds every sound carefully, as if afraid to break it. One wanderer, a thin, white-haired hermit known in the grasslands as Old Clock, claimed to have found a place where the world still ticks. He said he descended for days, following the soft rhythm of dripping water, until the air grew heavy with dust and faint static. There, deep within the bones of the planet, he found an enormous chamber filled with gears and dials, great rings of brass, still turning with a soft hum, untouched by rust. He said the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising off stone, and in that shimmer he saw shapes, not ghosts, but moments. People walking, talking, laughing, vanishing mid-step, as though they had been carved out of time and left to repeat their final seconds forever. He swore that among them he saw a little girl holding a balloon frozen in mid-air. Her eyes were closed, and the string slipped endlessly through her fingers, never falling, never flying away. The old man believed this was the center of lost time, a place where all broken moments gather, quietly spinning like dust in a beam of sunlight. When Finn heard the story, he didn't laugh. He only nodded softly, because he had seen something like that too, not underground, but in his dreams. There are nights when he walks through cities that don't exist anymore. He hears street sounds, human chatter, the rumble of distant engines, all things that no longer belong to his world. He sometimes wakes with the taste of rain and asphalt in his mouth, words on his tongue that he doesn't recognize but somehow misses, as if his heart, like the world beneath him, remembers more than his mind can hold. Perhaps that is what these buried cities are, not just remnants of a civilization, but fragments of the planet's dreaming memory. Every mountain, every river, every stretch of ground in Oo might rest upon the quiet pulse of something that once was alive in another way. Time didn't die with the humans. It sank softened, slowed, and curled up beneath the soil like a sleeping beast. Marceline once mused that maybe these places are what keep Oo from collapsing under the weight of its magic. She said, "The past is what gives the present its gravity. Without it, we'd all just drift off into the weird." And she might be right. Because whenever Finn stands at the edge of a ruined city or touches an artifact from the old world, there's always that faint vibration beneath his feet, as if the ground is humming its agreement. Every stone remembers where it came from. There's an eerie beauty to this, isn't there? The idea that humanity's end didn't echo with destruction, but settled into silence that grew fertile with memory. The silence beneath Oo isn't dead, it's full. It's where forgotten laughter sleeps, where unfinished dreams hum in dark harmony, and where the last seconds of the old world are stretched thin across eternity. In one of Bubblegum's experiments, she sent a small drone deep into a collapsed subway. It broadcasted for nearly an hour before the signal was lost. But in that short time, it recorded something that puzzled her endlessly, a pattern of sound. Not voices, not machinery, but rhythm. A faint, steady cadence, almost like breathing, or like a heartbeat slowed down to the tempo of mountains. She analyzed it, layered it, amplified it, and found that it followed no natural vibration. Its frequency matched no geological movement, no mechanical resonance. It was unique. She called it Echo Signature 1, But Finn, after listening to it, called it something else entirely. He said it sounded like the world sighing in its sleep, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe the cities beneath the silence are not lost. Maybe they are dreaming of the sky that once shone above them, of the people who built them, of the laughter that once filled their halls, dreaming of what it meant to be alive, to move, to speak, to remember. And as they dream, their memories rise slowly to the surface, not as ghosts or visions, but as ripples in the stillness of ooh. The rustling of leaves might be the echo of ancient traffic. The hum of a windmill could be a machine remembering how to sing. Even the glow of certain crystals in deep caves might be the residue of forgotten light, still trying to shine through endless dark. So, the next time you see Finn pause at the mouth of a cave or stare quietly at the ruins of an old tower, remember that he's not just looking at stone. He's feeling the pulse beneath it, that quiet heartbeat of the old world still turning somewhere deep below, spinning like the gears of a sleeping clock, waiting for someone to remember its song. Sometimes, late at night, Finn wakes from dreams that feel like memories that were never his. He'll sit by the window in the tree fort, staring out at the dark horizon of the hills faintly glowing beneath the moonlight, the forest breathing slow and deep, and he'll wonder how much of what he sees is new and how much is just the world remembering itself. There's a hum beneath everything if you listen closely enough. Not a sound, exactly more like a pressure, a vibration that lives in the stillness between sounds. That's where the cities beneath the silence continue to exist, pulsing faintly through the fabric of time. In the deepest parts of there are tunnels that no one has mapped. Some are natural caverns carved by rivers long gone, but others are unmistakably human hallways with tiled walls, metal doors, and faded signs pointing toward destinations that no longer have meaning. A few of them still hold light dim, trembling, like candle flames trapped behind glass. No one knows where the power comes from. Bubblegum believes it's an ancient generator powered by decaying isotopes, still flickering after 1,000 years. But others think differently. They say the lights are alive, tiny flickers of time still burning within the metal veins of the old world, moments refusing to be forgotten. There's a certain peace in that image, the idea that even the remnants of disaster could become gentle again. What was once noise and chaos has become the soft rhythm of sleep. It's strange to think that the apocalypse, that immense collapse of everything, could one day feel tender. But is full of such paradoxes. Every ruin grows flowers, every broken machine hums like a lullaby, and every silence carries within it the faintest trace of a song. One of the most curious places connected to these echoes lies beneath the Candy Kingdom. Deep below the familiar pastel-colored streets, there is a cavern sealed off by layers of reinforced rock and ancient shielding. Bubblegum knows it's there, but avoids speaking about it. She once told Marceline that it's better left sleeping. Those who have gotten close say the walls down there seem to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with something vast and unseen. And within that steady breath, they can hear fragments of sound. A child's laughter, the hum of a train, a countdown repeating endlessly in a voice too distant to make out. It's not frightening. It's almost comforting, like the memory of a lullaby sung in a language no one speaks anymore. If those echoes truly belong to the time before the Mushroom War, then they are among the last gentle remnants of the world that was lost. They've forgotten their shape, their meaning, their faces, but not their feeling. They remember what warmth was, what sunlight felt like, what it meant to look at someone and know them. And perhaps, in a way, they share those feelings with the world above. Because with all its magic and madness, is built from that memory. Every strange new creature, every enchanted forest, every city of candy and glass, all of them sprouted from the ashes of those silent cities below. They are the dreams that grew out of the earth's long mourning. Finn sometimes wonders if that's why he feels so deeply connected to places he's never been. Why certain ruins make his chest tighten, or why the sound of a faraway hum can lull him into silence. Maybe some part of him, the part that still seeks adventure, still listens for mystery, is tuned to those old frequencies. Maybe, just maybe, the spirits of lost time are whispering through him too. Marceline once told him, in one of her softer moods, that the world isn't haunted by ghosts, it's haunted by love. Everything we loved, she said, left an imprint. And those imprints don't fade. They just slow down until they become part of the quiet. And in that quiet, the cities beneath the silence still breathe. They breathe for all that was loved and lost, for every heartbeat that echoed once and never again. Their stillness is not a grave, it's a lullaby. When you think about it, time itself might be the greatest ghost of all. It lingers long after we're gone, wandering through the places we touched, humming softly to itself. And maybe that's why Finn feels it so keenly, because he too is part of that great remembering. He carries the past like a lantern, lighting his way through the strange new dawn of ooh. So the next time the night feels too still, too heavy with silence, try to listen closely. Beneath the hum of the earth, beneath the rustle of trees and the distant sigh of the wind, you might just hear it, the faint, rhythmic pulse of forgotten time, the breath of the cities beneath the silence, still dreaming, still waiting, still alive in the gentle dark. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles around Finn when he's alone. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that listens like the air itself is paying attention. It's in those moments, when the world grows quiet enough for thought to ripple through the silence, that Finn begins to hear them again. The echoes. They don't come often, and never when he expects them. Sometimes it's a faint vibration underfoot, humming through the floorboards of the tree fort late at night. Other times it's a flicker of sound that passes through a dream, a bell ringing from somewhere impossibly far away, or a voice calling his name in a tone that feels old, familiar, and kind. He's long stopped trying to explain them to Jake, who just smiles and tells him he's probably hearing his own thoughts. But Finn knows the difference. Thoughts are noisy, messy, full of motion. These echoes are quiet. They arrive like memories that don't belong to him, slipping into the edges of his mind and fading before he can grasp them. He first noticed them years ago, before he even knew the word echo. It was during a long journey through the desert, one of those strange, endless days when the sky felt too wide and the air shimmered with heat. He'd stopped by a cluster of half-buried ruins, nothing more than fragments of metal sticking up from the sand. As he sat in their shade, trying to rest, he began to hear something faint and rhythmic, a steady ticking, almost like a clock. He followed the sound, brushing aside sand and debris, until he found what looked like a small wristwatch. It was old, dented, and clearly broken, its hands frozen in place. But as he held it in his palm, the ticking grew louder. Not from the watch itself, but from the air around it. A pulse, faint and steady, as though time itself was breathing. He sat there for a long while, just listening. The wind was quiet, the sand unmoving. And then, for a moment, he heard something else beneath the ticking, a voice, faint and melodic, whispering words he couldn't quite make out. He didn't feel afraid. He felt remembered, as though the world was looking back at him through the memory of someone long gone. That night, Finn dreamed of a city he had never seen. Tall towers of glass and light, streets filled with laughter, the smell of rain and asphalt after a summer storm. He dreamed of people moving quickly through bright tunnels, their voices blending into a symphony of life. And at the center of it all, a sound, that same ticking, weaving through everything, marking each passing second with perfect rhythm. When he woke, the sound was gone, but the feeling remained soft and heavy in his chest, like a forgotten melody he somehow knew by heart. Over the years, the echoes began to find him in other ways. Sometimes through objects, an old tape recorder that crackled to life when no one touched it, whispering static shaped like half-words, or a broken piece of glass that reflected things that weren't there, faint outlines of people moving in the background of his reflection. Other times, it came as a feeling, a sudden warmth in the air, the smell of something human and fleeting, like coffee or smoke or rain-soaked streets. Little things that didn't belong in ooh anymore. Moments that felt misplaced. It wasn't until Finn met Simon again, long after the Crown's curse had lifted, that he started to understand what he might be hearing. Simon, more than anyone, knew what it meant to live between two worlds of time. He told Finn that sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still feel the static hum of the Crown, like faint snow falling through his thoughts. And sometimes, in that hum, he'd hear voices too, not of spirits or ghosts, but of then, echoes from the old world, fragments of lives that the universe hadn't quite let go of. Simon's words stayed with Finn, because maybe, he thought, these echoes weren't just reaching out to him, maybe he was reaching back. Maybe the space between the present and the past was thinner than anyone realized, and his heart, more than his mind, could sense it. There's something deeply human about the way Finn listens. He doesn't try to analyze or dissect what he hears. He simply feels it, like he's standing at the edge of an endless sea, letting its waves wash gently against his feet. Each ripple carrying a story, each whisper a glimpse of the world before the silence. And maybe that's why the echoes choose him. Because Finn isn't afraid of them. He doesn't see them as something lost, but as something still alive, still part of the great dream that ooh continues to breathe. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the grasslands in gold, he sat quietly by the pond near the tree fort. The water was perfectly still, and when he looked into it for just a moment, the reflection looking back wasn't quite his own. The face was older, lined with years he hadn't lived, but the eyes, they were the same. Blue, soft, and endlessly curious. He blinked and the image faded, rippling away into silence. But in that brief meeting he felt a strange peace, as if time itself had recognized him and smiled. Sometimes, after moments like that, Finn doesn't talk for a while. He just lets the feeling linger, quiet and golden, like dust settling after a long day. He's learned that trying to explain it only makes it smaller, because the echoes don't speak in words, they speak in reminders. A smell, a flicker of warmth, the sound of rain where there shouldn't be any. Little pieces of the world that brush against him and vanish, leaving behind a soft ache that feels almost like nostalgia for a life he's never lived. It started happening more often when he grew older. The adventures became rarer, the nights quieter, and the distance between dreams and waking began to thin. Sometimes he'd sit by the campfire and feel the air shift around him. The faint, familiar hum that once made his skin prickle now felt like company. He began to realize that these echoes weren't haunting him at all. They were looking after him. One night, during a long walk through the ruined outskirts of what used to be the human district, Finn found something strange. The ruins were buried under wild ivy and glowing fungi, and every surface was damp with dew. But as he wandered through a crumbling building, he noticed faint lines of light crawling along the walls, patterns that flickered like pulse waves. He touched one, and a sound filled the air, not from a machine, but from the stone itself. A voice, soft and fractured, whispering through layers of static. It wasn't clear, but he could make out single words. Welcome. Home. The words repeated, overlapping with themselves like a fading memory, and then in silence. He stood there for a long time, his hand still pressed to the stone, feeling the faint vibration beneath it. He could sense something trying to reach through, not a person, not even a thought, but a moment. A simple human moment trapped in the rhythm of the past, echoing forever beneath the layers of time. He whispered back, "Thank you," though he didn't really know why. And when he did, the pulse beneath his fingers quickened for just an instant, as if the echo had heard him. From that day forward, Finn began to notice more connections. Sometimes the wind carried voices not in language but in emotion. Sometimes the glow of an old sign would flicker just as he passed, like it was acknowledging him. He started to think of these moments not as coincidences, but as conversations, tiny exchanges between himself and the past, not of information, but of feeling. Simon once told him that the human mind had always feared silence. That's why they built so many things that made noise machines, music, cities that hummed like beehives. But after the Mushroom War, when all that noise was gone, the silence became something new, not emptiness, but memory space, a kind of vast, patient stillness where the echoes of those lost sounds could settle and sleep. Finn liked that idea, because when he listened carefully enough, he could feel those sleeping memories turning softly in their rest, not gone, not lost, just quiet. He wondered if maybe he too was an echo, not just a boy from this world, but a faint continuation of one that came before. Every dream he had that didn't make sense, every flash of strange familiarity, maybe it wasn't imagination. Maybe it was inheritance, the world's memory living through him, just as it lived through the trees, the stones, and the slow rivers that had once carried cities on their backs. Sometimes, when the night was especially still, he'd look up at the stars and feel like they were watching, not in the way of eyes, but in the way of recognition. They had seen everything, the rise and fall of worlds, the first fire and the last breath. They remembered the same way he did, not through details, but through light. And maybe that's what the echoes really are, fragments of light trapped in time, shining faintly through the veil of the present, searching for someone who can still see them. There's something deeply tender about that idea, that the past doesn't scream or cling, it whispers. It waits quietly for someone like Finn, someone gentle enough to listen. And every time he does, the world grows just a little bit warmer, a little more alive. Because the echoes, in their way, are still dreaming, and Finn, by hearing them, helps those dreams go on. One evening, as the golden light of dusk melted into the soft blue of twilight, Finn found himself near a quiet river, one that wound lazily through the ruins of an old highway. The water was shallow, smooth, and calm, gliding over what used to be asphalt and rusted car frames. Strange flowers had bloomed between the cracks, their petals glowing faintly with bioluminescent dust. The whole place felt like a dream someone had forgotten to finish. He sat by the edge, dangling his feet in the cool water, watching it flow between the shadows. And that's when it happened again, a faint ripple of sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the rush of the river or the song of the frogs. It was something delicate, rhythmic, almost like footsteps. When he looked across the water, he saw the faint outline of a figure walking along the opposite bank. Not a ghost, exactly more like the shimmer of a person made out of reflected light. The figure's edges wavered and bent with every breeze, and when Finn blinked, he could see the faint outline of clothing from a time before. A coat, a bag slung over the shoulder, and a small glowing rectangle in their hand, a device from the old world, long dead, still flickering faintly with static light. The figure paused and looked straight toward Finn. There were no eyes, just soft light where a face should be, yet Finn could feel the gaze, a kind of quiet recognition that seemed to stretch across centuries. The air grew still, and for a few seconds, it was as if the world was holding its breath. Then slowly, the figure lifted their hand and waved. Finn hesitated, but then smiled and waved back. The light flickered, trembling gently like water catching moonlight. And then the figure faded, dissolving to the hum of the evening air. What remained was a faint echo, not in sound, but in feeling a trace of warmth, the kind you get when someone you don't know wishes you well. He sat there long after it was gone, listening to the crickets begin their chorus. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet realization formed. These echoes were not simply fragments of tragedy or loss. They were pieces of connection. Little emotional fingerprints of people who had once cared, once loved, once hoped for something. And maybe that's why they lingered, not because they couldn't let go, but because they wanted to be remembered, even by someone they'd never meet. Finn thought of all the strange places he'd seen, the broken towers, swallowed by vines, the empty cities, sleeping beneath the grass. Each one felt alive in a way that went beyond the physical. Like each brick, each fallen street sign carried a small pulse of memory, not just of destruction, but of laughter, of footsteps, of music drifting through once busy windows. The world wasn't dead. It was quietly remembering itself. As night deepened, he built a small fire and lay back on the earth, staring up at the sky. The constellations shimmered above, ancient and unbothered. He began to wonder if even the stars carried echoes, the ghosts of their own light, reaching him from lifetimes ago. Perhaps that's what everything was, he thought. Echoes stacked upon echoes, layers of time rippling through one another, until they became the dream we call the present. Jake would have laughed at him for thinking so deeply before bed. But then again, Jake had always known that the world was strange in ways words couldn't capture. Maybe Jake had felt the echoes too, in his own way, in the rhythm of laughter, in the stillness after a long day, in the scent of rain returning to the earth. Finn thought back to one particular dream he'd had not long ago. In it, he stood in a vast, empty street lined with flickering lights. All around him, silhouettes of people moved in slow motion, their forms soft and translucent, like steam. None of them noticed him, but their movements felt familiar, almost like a memory of a crowd he'd once been part of. Somewhere, faintly, he could hear music playing, something warm, nostalgic, the kind of tune you'd hear in a cafe just before closing time. When he woke, the sound was still in his ears. For hours afterward, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stepped through time, not backward or forward, but sideways, into a forgotten moment that had been waiting for someone to notice. Maybe dreams, he thought, were the easiest bridges between now and then, where echoes and the living could meet without fear. That thought comforted him, because if that was true, then no moment was ever truly gone. The people who laughed before the war, the children who dreamed of the future, their wishes still floated somewhere in the quiet layers of the world, waiting for someone like Finn to hear them. And every time he did, he wasn't just remembering them. He was continuing their story, letting their light flicker once more in the dark. Somewhere in the ruins beyond the river, a faint breeze carried the scent of something sweet and old, like a memory of blooming gardens. The stars glimmered brighter for a moment, and Finn closed his eyes. The echoes were out there, whispering softly, and tonight they sounded almost at peace. There was a night, not long after that encounter by the river, when Finn camped near what used to be an observatory. The dome had cracked long ago, and the great telescope within lay in fragments, half buried in moss. It was one of those places that felt heavy with time, where every echo seemed to linger longer, as if reluctant to fade. The wind that swept through the hollow building carried a soft hum, like distant voices tangled in memory. As he wandered through the ruins, his lantern light danced over the walls, revealing carvings, not runes or magical marks, but words etched in a long-forgotten language. They were names, dozens of them. Maybe the names of those who had worked there, or perhaps the ones they'd tried to remember before everything fell apart. Some were worn smooth by the years, unreadable. Others glowed faintly when the lantern passed, as if still alive, still holding on. He reached the center of the observatory, where a small pool of water had formed beneath the broken dome. Above it, the stars reflected perfectly, unshaken by the wind. He sat at its edge and looked down. For a moment, his reflection seemed ordinary. Then the ripples began to shift. Another face emerged beside his older, tired, wearing strange glasses and a coat covered in dust. The man's eyes, though faint and spectral, seemed full of recognition. Finn didn't flinch. He only watched, calm and curious, as the reflection smiled. It was a soft, grateful smile, one that carried no fear, only quiet relief. The man's lips moved, forming words that Finn couldn't hear, yet somehow understood. "Thank you," Finn whispered back. "You're welcome." And then, as gently as mist, the reflection faded. He stayed there for a long while afterward, watching the stars ripple in the pool. Somewhere between his heartbeat and the sighing of the wind, he realized something important. The echoes weren't bound by sorrow. They weren't spirits of regret, but of remembrance. They lingered not because they were trapped, but because something in the present world still needed them. Perhaps they stayed until someone finally saw them, acknowledged their quiet existence, honored their story. And in that moment of being seen, they could finally rest. That night, Finn dreamed again. He dreamed of the same observatory, but it was whole this time, the dome intact, the telescope gleaming under moonlight. People moved inside, speaking softly, adjusting dials, writing in notebooks. The air was full of quiet purpose. He saw the man from the reflection standing near the telescope, looking up at the stars with wonder. When he turned, their eyes met again, and this time Finn heard his voice clearly. "We never meant to be gods," the man said. "We only wanted to understand." Finn didn't answer. He just smiled, feeling that familiar warmth in his chest, that bittersweet mix of sadness and hope. The dream shimmered, and when he opened his eyes again, dawn had already begun to color the horizon. The world outside was waking slowly, birds calling from the trees that had grown over the ruins, light catching on the dew. Everything felt connected, the old and the new, the living and the remembered, woven together in the same gentle breath. Finn realized that the echoes weren't haunting the present. They were the present, the living residue of what once was, quietly shaping what would come next. When he packed up his things, he looked back at the observatory one last time. In the daylight, it looked peaceful. The names on the walls no longer glowed, but he didn't need them to. He knew they were still there, resting in the silence. As he began walking toward the horizon, he thought about how strange it was that silence could hold so much life, how within that quiet, 1,000 memories could bloom and fade and bloom again, all in the space of a breath. And maybe that's what time really was, not a straight line, but an ocean of moments overlapping, blending, whispering to one another across eternity. Finn felt the weight of that thought settle softly around him, like a blanket. He didn't need to understand it all. He only needed to listen. Because somewhere, in the still places of the world, the echoes were still singing, not loudly, not demanding attention, but in the gentle way of lullabies, reminders that nothing, not even time, ever truly disappears. He smiled to himself as the morning light touched his face. The echoes would always be there, he thought, tucked inside every breeze and shadow, every laugh and dream. Maybe they were never meant to scare or sadden anyone. Maybe they were simply trying to say goodnight. And as the wind carried through the valley, whispering softly through the grass, it almost sounded like they were saying it back. Tonight we drift deeper into a chapter of Oo's history that few dare to remember. A moment when time itself seemed to shatter, freezing the heartbeat of the world. This is the war that froze the clocks. When people in the land of O speak of the Mushroom War, they often describe it as an ending. A great flash, a silence that followed, and then the birth of a new world built on the bones of the old. But endings, as we've come to learn, are never truly clean. Sometimes, when a moment burns too brightly, its light keeps echoing long after it's gone. The Mushroom War wasn't only a war of weapons, it was a war of time. A war that fractured the flow of hours, splitting memory from motion, trapping certain moments in loops that still, even now, pulse quietly beneath the surface of the world. There are places in Oo where the clocks no longer move. Towers swallowed by ivy, frozen at the same minute for centuries. Pockets of space where shadows refuse to change their angle, where the air feels thicker like syrup, like history that won't quite let go. Finn has wandered through these places before, feeling that subtle distortion in his chest, the strange tug between now and then. He calls it the slow air. To him, it feels like walking through the memory of an explosion that never stopped echoing. It's believed that during the final days of the war, humanity tried to contain time itself, not metaphorically, but literally. The great scientists, desperate to reverse their mistakes, began to tamper with the flow of causality. Some say they built machines that could fold moments back on themselves so they could relive an hour again and again until they got it right. Others whisper of Chronos vaults, secret structures meant to lock away entire stretches of existence to keep the worst parts of the war from touching the rest of the world. But time is not meant to be contained, and when they tried, it shattered. All across the land, the hour hand stopped. For days, or maybe years, no one knew if time was still moving. People lived inside stretched seconds, voices echoing endlessly, raindrops hanging mid-fall. Some tried to run, only to find their steps repeating like a skipping record trapped in its own sorrow. This is why, even now, certain ruins feel alive in strange ways. A flickering light in a window that should have gone dark ages ago. A radio signal that still plays the same song from the day the bombs fell. They are not hauntings, not exactly. They are time scars, moments that refuse to end, caught in the fracture between what was and what is. Simon Petrikov once theorized that the crown's strange magic might have been born from one of these fractures. The gems embedded in its frame, ancient, alien, unpredictable, might have absorbed the lingering temporal energy of that frozen world. Perhaps that's why the Ice King's memories were so tangled, each thought a shard from a different timeline, looping endlessly within his mind. In his loneliness, he lived the same heartbreak again and again, each time forgetting that he'd already survived it. If the war froze the clocks, then the survivors became their ticking hands, each human heartbeat trying to keep time alive again. But even now, Oo still trembles under the weight of that broken rhythm. The sun rises and sets, the seasons shift, yet somewhere deep beneath, the gears still grind, half remembering what it felt like to stop. There are places where you can hear it, if you're quiet enough. Not the ticking of a clock, but something older, a deep, slow resonance, like the sound of a great machine breathing in its sleep. Some call it the pulse of time, others think it's the echo of the war's final weapon, a device that tried to restart the world, but never fully did. The truth, like most things in Oo, lives somewhere between magic and science. The Mushroom War was the event where both became one, where human creation met cosmic will. And what emerged from that collision was not just destruction, but a strange, trembling kind of rebirth. The clocks may have stopped, but life went on anyway. It simply learned to live around time, to bloom in the cracks of its stillness. The grass grew over melted steel, the ocean swallowed cities, and from that silence, magic began to breathe again. And yet, sometimes when the air grows still, you can feel that pause return, that strange sensation that time itself is holding its breath, the same stillness that once swept across the earth in the final hour of the war. It is a quiet, too deep to be natural, a hush that carries with it the memory of the moment everything changed. That is the legacy of the frozen clocks, a reminder that time is fragile, and when it breaks, pieces of the past can drift forever. Somewhere in the frozen north, long before Finn ever set foot there, explorers spoke of a valley where the air shimmered like glass. They said that when you entered, your footsteps would echo seconds after you made them, as if the world was struggling to keep up. The valley was littered with remnants of the old world metal skeletons of aircraft, fractured towers half melted into the snow, and clusters of clock faces scattered like broken shells. None of them moved, but all of them still ticked faintly, as if each one was trying to remember how. Simon had once written about this place in one of his old journals, calling it the Chrono Basin. He described it as the heart of the temporal fracture, the place where the war's final experiment went wrong. He believed that a machine buried deep beneath the ice, powered by something not entirely human, had tried to rewrite the end of the war. But the machine had failed. Instead of reversing the damage, it had frozen the final moment, stretching it across endless layers of reality, like a reflection in shattered glass. And so in the Chrono Basin, time doesn't flow. It hums. It vibrates. Every gust of wind, every flake of falling snow moves just a fraction slower, as if the entire landscape is caught between two heartbeats. Those who wander too far into it sometimes lose hours, days, or even themselves. When they return, if they return, they speak of hearing voices, not from ghosts, but from different versions of themselves. Some laughing, some crying, some calling out names they don't remember knowing. It's as though the war fractured not just the world, but every life that lived through it, scattering pieces of existence across the frozen edges of time. Finn once passed near that region on a journey with Jake. They hadn't meant to, but storms have a way of steering travelers where stories wait to be found. The wind had carried a strange tone that night, almost melodic, a sound that pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. When they reached the rim of the basin, the world fell silent. Even Jake's voice seemed swallowed by the snow. Finn remembered seeing lights flickering below, not torchlight, not magic, but steady mechanical glows in patterns that felt deliberate, like a signal from something ancient, still waiting for an answer. Jake had wanted to leave immediately, his fur standing on end, but Finn stayed a while longer. The silence fascinated him. There was something sacred in it, a kind of suspended beauty, as if the world was preserving that single moment forever. The snow around them shimmered faintly, and in that shimmer, Finn thought he saw people. Not shadows or ghosts, but clear images, humans, frozen mid-motion. Some running, some shielding their eyes, some reaching out toward the sky. They weren't truly there, of course. They were fragments, projections, memories trapped in the stillness. But to Finn, they felt heartbreakingly alive. It was as though the last second of the Mushroom War, the moment the great flash consumed everything, had been carved into the fabrics of time itself, replaying silently in that frozen place for eternity. Jake tugged at his arm, urging him away, and as they left the basin behind, Finn kept looking back. He swore that one of the frozen figures had turned its head just slightly, as if watching him go. For days afterward, he could still feel the weight of that gaze, not angry or mournful, but curious, almost grateful that someone had come to see them again. Later, when Finn told Princess Bubblegum about it, she went quiet in that thoughtful way she often did when old memories stirred. She didn't dismiss it as a ghost story. Instead, she nodded slowly and said, "Time doesn't heal by itself, Finn. Sometimes it just waits." He didn't fully understand what she meant then, but over the years, it began to make sense. The frozen moments left by the war weren't errors or leftovers. They were wounds that the world had decided not to close. Wounds filled with silence, yes, but also with memory. And maybe the world was waiting for someone, someday, to listen closely enough to help them move again. Because time, like people, sometimes needs kindness to start ticking again. There are ruins scattered throughout Ulu that carry a peculiar rhythm, places where the air feels thick with repetition, like the world itself is replaying an old memory. Some are marked by the soft hum of machinery buried deep beneath moss and stone. Others by flickering lights that pulse in a steady heartbeat, illuminating old corridors for a moment before vanishing again. Finn once wandered into such a place near the edge of the grasslands, a sunken structure made of dark metal, almost entirely swallowed by the earth. It was quiet there, too quiet, the kind of silence that hums against your ears. When he touched the cold wall, the floor beneath him shifted, and suddenly the space around him flickered to life. The walls began to glow faintly, displaying shadows of people moving, working, laughing, unaware that they were only echoes of a long-lost moment. For an instant, Finn was standing in the past. He could see the shapes of scientists bent over glowing screens, engineers shouting across the room, and one tall figure pointing at a large dial at the center of the chamber. The clock on the wall behind them read 11:59. It never changed, no matter how the scene played, no matter how the echoes moved and spoke. The hands of the clock remained fixed 1 minute before midnight. Finn understood then that this was another scar from the war, one of the time vaults Simon had once written about. A place that had tried to preserve a single minute forever, perhaps in hopes of stopping the catastrophe from arriving. But time doesn't forgive interference easily. When he blinked, the room changed again, the light fading, the laughter dissolving. The figures grew distorted, their forms melting into the air like smoke, and in their place, the clock began to tick. Slowly at first, then faster, like it was trying to make up for the years it had lost. The sound filled the room, echoing off the metal walls, growing louder and sharper until Finn covered his ears. Then, with one final resounding click, the clock stopped again. The silence that followed was immense, pressing against his chest like the weight of the entire world. When he finally stepped outside, the sunlight felt strange, thinner somehow, as if filtered through an old photograph. He realized that even stepping into a moment like that had changed him slightly, as though the memory of the frozen second had followed him back into the present. It wasn't haunting, exactly. More like carrying a tiny fragment of that stillness inside himself. Over the years, Finn learned that these frozen places weren't just scattered randomly. They were aligned faintly in a pattern that resembled a web, each one connected by invisible threads of energy, like the synapses of a dreaming mind. Princess Bubblegum had theorized that the old world's time experiments might have been linked through a network of temporal relays. When the war ended, the network didn't just collapse, it kept running in broken loops, endlessly repeating fragments of the same seconds across the planet. And maybe, she mused one night, that was why Ooh felt so alive. Magic didn't simply appear after the war. It was born from those loops, from the mixing of science and chaos, human will and cosmic rhythm. When time fractured, possibility seeped through the cracks. The strange creatures, the living landscapes, Even the dreamlike laws of reality, all of it, perhaps, came from that single moment when the clocks froze and refused to move again. Finn liked that idea. The thought that from destruction came not just silence, but wonder, that the end of one timeline could give birth to 1,000 others, all breathing and dreaming their own way forward. Sometimes, when he camped beneath the stars, he'd lie awake and listen to the faint hum of the night, the crickets, the rustle of leaves, the low buzz of something ancient beneath the earth. To him it all sounded like one vast, patient heartbeat, the rhythm of a world still remembering how to move through the time again. He would close his eyes and imagine that he could hear the clocks beneath the soil, slowly beginning to tick once more softly, hesitantly, as if waking from a long and dreamless sleep. Maybe that's what healing sounded like. Not a grand restart, not fireworks or revelation, but a quiet, steady rhythm returning at last. He thought about how, even now, there are moments that seem to last forever, a sunrise that feels endless, a breath that stretches into calm. Maybe those are the pieces of frozen time that survived, moments the world keeps replaying because they're too beautiful to let go. And maybe in the end, that's what the war gave to Ooh. Not just ruin or silence, but the gift of stillness, a chance for time to pause, breathe, and start again in a new shape. When the clocks froze, the world didn't stop, it fractured. Moments splintered off into shards, and each shard became its own timeline, a tiny echo of what could have been. Most of those echoes faded quickly, dissolving into the empty air. But some persisted. Some clung to the fabric of reality like dreams that refused to end. These were the pocket moments, as Marceline once called them. Loops of time that hadn't realized the war was over. She and Finn stumbled into one while exploring an abandoned valley filled with broken satellites and half-buried towers. The sky above them shimmered faintly like it was made of glass, and every few minutes lightning would flash across the horizon in the same pattern, the same sound, the same light, over and over. At first, Finn thought it was just a storm caught in repetition. But when they reached the top of a collapsed observation deck, they saw people, or rather, the shadows of people still frozen, mid-motion, staring at the sky as though waiting for something. One of them held a hand out, pointing to the heavens. Another was crouched near the ground, shielding a child. And then, the lightning struck again, and everything reset. The shadows moved, repeated, froze. Marceline whispered that it was like watching ghosts trapped inside a heartbeat. Finn could feel it too, that strange ache of witnessing a moment that wanted to end, but never could. He stepped forward, and as his foot touched the ground, the light changed. The entire loop stuttered, flickering between frames, and for a second, the world around them seemed to notice. The frozen figures turned their heads, their eyes faint, glowing with a distant, digital blue fixed on him. And for the briefest instant, Finn thought he heard them whisper a word that sounded like, "Wait." Then the loop snapped, and everything went still again. Later, when they escaped the valley, Marceline said that maybe those echoes weren't just glitches. Maybe they were messages. The world itself trying to remind them of something, or warn them about what happens when time is forced to stand still. Because that's what the war really did. It made the world hold its breath. Entire regions of Ooh remained locked in temporal hesitation for centuries. Forests that never grew older. Rivers that forgot how to flow. Even some creatures, strange glass-eyed animals that moved only when watched, might have been survivors of these suspended seconds. And in a way, the people of Ooh became caretakers of this fractured time. The Ice King's madness, Bubblegum's obsession with control, even the slow decay of the Candy Kingdom's machinery, all were symptoms of a planet still learning how to live with time again. Simon once wrote in a half-burnt notebook that he believed the clocks didn't freeze by accident. He theorized that when the old world faced extinction, something or someone made the decision to stop time itself, not to save humanity, but to pause it, to give the universe a moment to decide what it wanted to become next. Maybe it was a final act of mercy, or maybe it was an experiment that went wrong. But whatever the cause, that stillness became the foundation for everything that came after. Magic filled the gaps where time once flowed. Memory replaced logic. Dreams began to leak into reality, and in that quiet, a new world began to write itself. Sometimes late at night, Finn would sit by the fire and think about the ticking of his watch. He liked that sound, the way it marked each second, patient and precise. It reminded him that time was moving again, that the world had chosen to continue. He'd imagined that somewhere, deep beneath the soil, the ancient clocks of the old world were also stirring gears shifting, dust falling away, hands twitching toward the next minute. And maybe, when they finally tick forward, the last frozen second will end, and all the echoes, the voices, the shadows, the memories will finally be free. Finn doesn't know what that would look like. Maybe the stars will blink in unison. Maybe the rivers will change their course. Or maybe nothing visible will happen at all, just a collective sigh, as the planet finally exhales after holding its breath for 1,000 years. That's the quiet truth about the war that froze the clocks. It wasn't just a war of machines and destruction. It was a war against time itself. And though the world survived, it never truly forgot the silence that followed. Every tick of every clock since then is a reminder not of loss, but of endurance. That even when the world's heart stopped beating, it found a way to start again. And perhaps that's why Ooh still dreams, because somewhere, buried in its core, time is still listening, still waiting for the right moment to wake up fully. And when it does, when the last frozen second finally melts into motion, maybe that's when the story will truly begin again. There are places in Ooh that don't seem fully awake. If you walk far enough into the wilderness beyond the soft hum of the Candy Kingdom and the last flicker of electric light, you'll find them. Old cities made of sleep and silence. They rise from the earth like half-forgotten memories, towers of glass wrapped in vines, roads that shimmer faintly under moonlight, and doorways that lead to nowhere but inward. Finn once called them the dreaming rooms. He didn't mean that poetically. He meant that when he stood among them, he could feel the ruins dreaming a quiet pulse, a rhythm that moved beneath the stone, as if the walls remembered something too deeply to let go. He first felt it in the great southern expanse, a desert where the sand glowed pale blue under the stars. He and Jake had been chasing a rumor, one of those strange stories passed along by tree spirits and wandering rain clouds, a rumor about a place where time folded into itself, where voices could be heard beneath the earth. They found it at dawn when the horizon was still painted in the softest shades of lilac. There, buried in the dunes, stood the remains of a massive city. The walls were made of mirrored glass, cracked in 1,000 places, reflecting both the sky above and the sand below. From certain angles, it looked like the whole place was floating a reflection without a world to anchor it. As Finn and Jake wandered deeper into the ruins, the air grew still, not quiet, but still, in that strange way that makes every sound feel too loud, too real. Even their footsteps seemed hesitant, as though the sand itself was reluctant to disturb what slept beneath. They came across a square filled with statues, all identical, all facing the same direction. At first, Finn thought they were people turned to stone by some spell, but when he brushed the dust from one of their faces, he saw a faint circuitry running beneath the surface, not magic, but technology, ancient and forgotten. Jake said the place gave him the creeps. Finn agreed. But something about it drew him in. He felt as though he had seen this place before, maybe in a dream, or maybe in one of those strange visions that sometimes found him when he least expected it. In the center of the square stood a clock tower. Its face was broken, its hands long gone, yet somehow Finn could hear it, a low ticking sound, faint but steady. Jake couldn't hear it at all, only Finn. He followed the sound into the tower, where he found stairs winding downward into the dark. The walls were covered in murals, depictions of a city that once reached the clouds, filled with people dressed in brilliant white, surrounded by strange floating shapes. The deeper he went, the more the murals changed. The figures began to blur. Their eyes grew hollow, their buildings cracked, until finally, at the lowest chamber, there was nothing left but a single mural, a hand reaching toward a clock that had stopped at midnight. When Finn touched the mural, the ticking sound stopped, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive. He could hear whispers, faint and rhythmic, like breathing. The walls trembled softly, and for a moment, the entire ruin seemed to inhale. Then came the dream. He saw flashes, streets filled with light, laughter echoing through glass corridors, people looking up at the sky as something enormous and burning passed overhead. And then, just as suddenly, everything froze. The people turned into silhouettes. The buildings cracked like mirrors, and the light folded inward. When Finn woke, he was lying outside the tower with Jake watching over him. The sun had fully risen, and the ruins looked almost peaceful again, empty, quiet, still half buried in sand. Jake said he'd only been out for a few minutes, but Finn felt like he'd been gone for days. On their way back, Finn couldn't stop thinking about what he saw, those glimpses of the old world, the frozen people, the silence that followed. He wondered if the ruins themselves were dreaming of their own destruction, reliving the moment when everything ended again and again. Maybe the land of Oo wasn't just built on top of the old world. Maybe it was built with its layers of dreams and memories fusing together, unable to separate, unable to forget. The dreaming ruins, in that sense, aren't just remnants of the past. They're living memories, places where the old world still sleeps, whispering softly through the cracks of time. And if you stand still long enough among their broken towers, you might just hear them breathe. As Finn and Jake continued their journey through the dreaming ruins, the desert sun climbed higher, yet the city seemed untouched by it. The air shimmered with heat, but the shadows stayed cool and deep, as though the ruins had made a pact with time to never truly move again. Jake stretched lazily and said the place felt like a mirage that refused to disappear. But Finn wasn't convinced it was only that. Something about these ruins felt present. In the same way a memory lingers just before you wake up, you can't hold it, but you can feel its weight pressing softly against you. They reached a cracked bridge that led over what used to be a canal. There was no water now, only sand glinting like powdered glass. Beneath the bridge, they found carvings that pulsed faintly when touched. The symbols glowed for a heartbeat, then dimmed again, like the ruin itself was testing whether it remembered how to live. Finn said it reminded him of the ruins under the Candy Kingdom, the old laboratories that Bonnibel had walled off after discovering traces of strange pre-war energy. She had once told him that some of the structures beneath Oo still emitted faint temporal waves, ripples from the day the clocks froze. Maybe the city was one of those forgotten hearts, still beating inside the earth, unaware that the world had moved on. At nightfall, they camped inside the shell of a building that had once been a museum. The walls were still lined with half-broken display cases, each holding objects too strange to name: crystalline discs, melted devices, fragments of screens that flickered when the wind passed through. When the moon rose, those fragments began to glow faintly, forming ghostly reflections on the walls. Finn couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, thick with the hum of invisible energy. When he closed his eyes, he saw Flicker's people walking down the halls where he now sat, laughing softly, unaware of what was coming. For a moment, he felt the urge to speak to them, to tell them to run, but when he opened his eyes, the figures vanished, leaving only the faintest outline of their steps in the dust. He whispered to Jake, who was half asleep, that maybe the ruins weren't just ruins. Maybe they were part of a larger dream one, that the land itself kept dreaming so it wouldn't forget. Jake mumbled something about ghost memories and went back to snoring. But Finn stayed awake. He could hear the same low ticking again, the one he'd heard in the clock tower earlier. Only this time, it came from all around him, from the floor, the walls, even the air itself. It was soft, rhythmic, almost like the ruins were breathing in their sleep. He followed the sound outside, stepping carefully through the moonlit streets. The air shimmered faintly, and he could see traces of the city as it once was not fully formed, but layered like reflections in still water. There were glimpses of lighted windows, the faint hum of voices, and music carried by the wind. The scene wasn't frightening, it was lonely. Finn realized that whatever these echoes were, they weren't trying to haunt anyone. They were trying to remember themselves. The city was dreaming of what it used to be, and Finn had simply wandered into its sleep. When he looked up, the moon's light struck the mirrored towers, and for just a moment, he could see hundreds of faces reflected in the glass, not real, but faint, glowing outlines. They looked peaceful, waiting. He stood there for a long time, letting the silence settle around him. The ruins were no longer eerie or alien. They felt gentle, like the remnants of something that had once loved being alive. And as the night deepened, the ticking faded again, replaced by the quiet hum of the desert wind. The ruins seemed to exhale, as if drifting deeper into their dream. That night, before Finn finally fell asleep beside Jake, he whispered to himself that maybe not all ghosts are people. Some might be places that remember too much. When dawn returned, the ruins shimmered with a soft golden haze, and for a moment, Finn thought the whole city had changed overnight. The mirrored towers seemed brighter now, the cracked surfaces glinting like scales on the back of a sleeping giant. Even the sand looked alive, breathing gently, rising and falling as though something vast slumbered beneath it. Jake yawned and said it was time to move on, but Finn hesitated. He couldn't shake the feeling that the city wasn't done with them yet. There was still something beneath the surface, something waiting to be seen. They wandered toward the eastern edge, where the remains of a huge dome stretched across the skyline. Inside, half-collapsed pillars formed a strange pattern on the floor, a circle of stone with faint markings that pulsed faintly when the sunlight struck them. Finn knelt down, brushing away the sand, and found that the markings formed a spiral, not unlike the symbol he'd once seen carved into ancient ruins near the Nightosphere portal. He traced it with his finger, and the stone grew warm under his touch. The spiral began to glow, not brightly, but enough to reveal shapes beneath the dome outlines of long-buried machinery and fragments of text in a language older than any he knew. Jake backed away, muttering that this was definitely some ghost tech nonsense, but Finn stayed. He felt like the ruins were trying to speak to him. As he stood in the center of the spiral, a breeze passed through the dome, carrying with it a sound like whispering voices layered one over another. He couldn't make out words, only tones sorrowful, patient, and impossibly ancient. Then he saw them again. The echoes. They appeared like reflections in the air. Figures dressed in strange uniforms, standing at glowing consoles, their faces blurred by the shimmer of light. They were talking, gesturing urgently to one another as if in the middle of a crisis. The entire dome seemed to flicker between two states, one ancient and broken, the other alive and pulsing with energy. Finn could feel his heart pounding, not in fear, but in awe. He realized he was standing inside a memory, one left behind by the world that came before. These weren't ghosts in the human sense. They were fragments of thought, impressions burned into the space itself, looping quietly through eternity. The light brightened, and Finn saw a woman, or what looked like one, standing at the center of the dome. Her form was made of shifting light, her features indistinct, but her presence felt enormous. She reached toward something above her, a great suspended structure that glowed with symbols and rotating rings. Finn didn't understand what it was, but he sensed its purpose. It was meant to preserve time, to store it, to keep it from dissolving completely. Then in a single flash, everything went silent. The figures vanished. The air grew cold. The spiral stopped glowing. Jake called out, his voice echoing sharply in the empty space. Finn blinked, and the dome was just a ruin again, quiet, cracked, lifeless. Only the faint spiral remained glowing on the floor, fading slowly as if taking one last breath. Finn told Jake what he'd seen. Jake listened, his brow furrowed, tail twitching. "Maybe you saw the moment the world tried to save itself," Jake said softly. "Maybe that's what this place is, the memory of trying." Finn nodded. He didn't know if it was the truth, but it felt right. The dreaming ruins weren't just the bones of a city. They were the memory of an idea that time could be held, that loss could be prevented, that even as the world burned, someone had tried to keep it from ending completely. They left the dome and followed a long, crumbling road that led to the outskirts of the city. From there, Finn turned back for one last look. The ruins glowed faintly in the rising light, the same color as a morning sky reflected on still water. For a moment, Finn imagined that beneath those towers the city still dreaming of what it once was, dreaming of the people who had built it, dreaming that maybe, someday, it would wake again. He wondered what it would say if it could speak. Would it remember their faces? Would it ask what became of the world it had tried to save? Or would it only sigh, relieved that time had finally moved on? The wind swept through, carrying a soft, musical hum. It was the same tone he had heard inside the dome, distant but comforting. He smiled faintly, realizing the city was speaking just in a language of echoes and wind. And as he turned to leave, Finn whispered a quiet goodbye, not to the ruins themselves, but to the dream that still lingered within them, a dream too gentle to fade, even after the end of time. As Finn and Jake walked away from the dreaming ruins, the desert stretched endlessly before them, but something about the city lingered in the air. The warmth of the morning sun made the sand glimmer like tiny stars, and yet beneath that light, Finn could still feel the pulse of the ruins, soft, steady, like the slow breathing of someone asleep for centuries. He remembered the shapes he had seen in the dome, the figures made of light, their movements frozen and fluid all at once. They weren't just echoes of people. They were the intentions of the old world, preserved in stone and sand. The city had tried to protect something greater than itself, a memory of a time before the world fell apart. And in its dreaming, it had reached out quietly, for anyone who might listen. Finn thought about the spiral in the dome. Its glow had been faint but persistent, and he could almost feel the pattern threading through the ruins, linking hallways and towers, courts and plazas, all into a single pulse of memory. Maybe that spiral wasn't just decoration or machinery. Maybe it was a map, not of places, but of moments, a network of time itself, stored and protected, looping endlessly in the quiet of the ruins. Jake, sensing Finn's reverie, nudged him gently. "Hey, buddy, don't get lost in your head again," he said. "These ruins might be dreaming, but we're still in the real world." Finn smiled, knowing Jake was right. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that these ruins were alive in a way most of Uru would never understand. Not alive in the sense of movement or sound, but alive in memory. Every crack in the wall, every shard of glass, Every faded mural carried fragments of the people who had once walked there, and those fragments had somehow taken on a life of their own. As they continued along the sand-swept road, Finn imagined what it must have been like when the city was awake. The air would have been filled with music, laughter, and the low hum of machinery, not the eerie quiet that now dominated the ruins, but a vibrant heartbeat of existence. And yet, even in its slumber, the city retained that heartbeat, soft and persistent, hidden beneath centuries of dust and desert wind. At one point, Finn paused to examine a set of carved pillars half buried in sand. The carvings depicted scenes of daily life, people walking through markets, children playing with small mechanical toys, scholars debating under great domes of glass. The details were precise, almost photographically vivid, yet there was a slight distortion to each image, a wavering that made the figures seem to shimmer between states. It was then that Finn understood. These weren't just memories of people, but memories of experience itself. The city was not merely trying to preserve names or faces. It was trying to hold on to the sensation of living, the essence of what it meant to exist in that world. Every echo of laughter, every shadow of a hand reaching for something, had been folded into the very walls, forming a lattice of feeling that pulsed faintly in the heat of the desert. Jake leaned back on his elbows, watching Finn trace his fingers over the carvings. "You really think this place is dreaming?" he asked. Finn nodded slowly. "Yeah, not dreaming like people do, with thoughts and wishes, but like a city remembering, like it wants to keep itself alive, even if it can't fully move again." The day passed as they wandered through the outer streets, and as the sun began to set, the ruins glowed with a strange, ethereal light. Shadows stretched and twisted, reflecting the shapes of figures that weren't there. And yet Finn didn't feel fear. The city's dream was gentle, patient, almost tender. It didn't want to harm. It only wanted to be remembered. That night, they camped near a collapsed amphitheater. Finn lay awake, staring at the stars, thinking about the echoes of the ruins. He imagined the people from the murals walking silently through the sand, playing their instruments, studying, laughing, and living again in the only way left to them through memory. He thought about how fragile those memories were, yet how persistent. How a city could sleep for centuries and still pulse with the rhythm of life. Jake, half asleep beside him, mumbled something about haunted cities, but Finn only smiled. The ruins weren't haunted. They were dreaming. They were the quiet, patient pulse of a world that refused to vanish completely. They were proof that even after everything had ended, fragments of life could endure, quietly folding into the new world, whispering to anyone who cared to listen. Before drifting off, Finn whispered to the ruins, not expecting an answer, but wanting them to know that he had seen. He had walked among them, he had listened, and he had remembered. In the soft desert wind, the ruins seemed to sigh a faint, contented breath that brushed across the sand, brushing past the sleeping figures, carrying with it the faintest echo of lives long past. And as Finn closed his eyes, he realized that the dreaming ruins were more than just remnants of the old world. They were bridges, gentle, patient, and luminous, connecting the echoes of yesterday with the promise of tomorrow. We settle into the final rhythm of our tale, exploring a quieter, subtler truth of the idea that time itself can learn to sleep. It's a strange thought, isn't it? That time which we measure and chase, which seems eternal and relentless, might one day pause and rest. But in the land of after everything that has happened, it is not only possible, it has already happened, in small, delicate ways. Consider the remnants of the Mushroom War and the echoes that lingered long after the last explosion faded. The world was fractured, the clocks froze, and yet life went on. Slowly, gently it adapted. Plants grew in patterns that defied calculation. Rivers wandered without mapping, and creatures thrived in rhythms not entirely dictated by hours or days. In a sense, time had begun to breathe differently. It learned to slow, to stretch, to pause without disappearing. Finn has wandered through these spaces many times, and he has felt it most clearly in the quiet mornings, when the wind hums through a ruined tower, evenings when the sky glows long after the sun has disappeared. He feels the pulse of the world not in seconds or minutes, but in soft, living breaths. Each one carries the weight of what came before and the gentle promise of what is yet to arrive. Some of the ruins he has walked through seem to remember their own past. The dreaming cities, the frozen towers, the spirals of ancient laboratories, all of them act like a soft heartbeat beneath the surface of the land. They hold onto fragments of moments, looping them gently, not to trap them, but to let them rest. They are not haunted in fear or regret, but cradled in a patient memory that doesn't demand attention, only acknowledgement. When Finn touches a cold wall, a cracked piece of glass, or a shard of metal, he sometimes feels a faint vibration. It's as though the materials themselves are breathing in time with the world, exhaling the echoes of centuries into the present. It is a rhythm that cannot be measured, not with clocks or watches, because it belongs to a different order of existence, one where past, present, and future fold together in quiet contemplation. Jake, ever practical and sometimes impatient, doesn't always feel this. He sees the ruins as static, dead, abandoned. But Finn has learned that the subtle pulses beneath the surface are alive in ways that cannot be touched or seen. Time has grown gentle here. It has learned to sleep. There are nights when the sky itself seems to slow its turning, and Finn can feel it pressing against his chest like a warm blanket. The stars hang longer in the heavens, their light drifting lazily across the land. Even the wind seems measured, moving with care as if it has learned patience. These are the moments when time is not a relentless march forward, but a quiet companion, lying beside him as he walks, listens, and remembers. He recalls wandering through a canyon filled with fractured mirrors and shards of glass left behind by the old world. Each piece reflected not only the present, but glimpses of the past, fleeting images of people and cities long gone, of skies that burned and seas that roared before the land had healed. For a long while, Finn simply stood, letting the reflections wash over him. In that stillness, he felt the pulse of history itself, not as a series of events to be feared or lamented, but as a living, breathing entity, slowing to rest and allowing him to rest with it. Somewhere deep beneath Ooh, in places few dare to venture, the veins of the planet carry the memory of time like a soft, steady current. Ruins buried beneath earth and moss hum faintly with rhythms older than humans, older than magic, older than the mushroom war. These pulses are subtle, but they exist, a gentle heartbeat that hints at the world's ability to pause, to fold its moments inward, and to breathe. Finn can feel it when he walks across stone floors that have not been stepped on for centuries. The energy is neither threatening nor sorrowful. It is restful, patient, and immensely alive. The Ice King, in his moments of lucidity, seemed to sense this as well. His fractured mind often glimpsed strands of time that moved differently from the rest of the world. He saw people and places that no longer existed in the present, and sometimes he tried to speak to them. His solitude, amplified by the crown, allowed him to understand that time could stretch, could pause, and could even sleep, folding his memories and those of others into the folds of reality. His loneliness, though tragic, was a quiet testament to the hidden life of time, a life that continues even when the world above seems frozen or abandoned. Princess Bubblegum, too, studied these rhythms. Beneath her laboratory and across her kingdom, she observed patterns that defied normal measurement. The machinery she built often hummed with unexpected delays or anticipations, as if responding to temporal currents flowing beneath the surface. In her quieter moments, she would note that the world seemed to slow when it needed to, giving life a chance to catch its breath, to heal, and to continue. Finn understood this intuitively. Time was no longer just seconds and minutes. It was something alive, capable of rest, capable of patience, capable of holding on to moments that mattered. And in where the mushroom war had once fractured reality, this gentle learning of rest was not only necessary but beautiful. The echoes of the past, the frozen seconds, the dreaming ruins, all of them were participating in a subtle choreography, teaching the land how to breathe again. And so Finn walks, slowly, deliberately, listening for the pulse beneath the stone, the hum beneath the sand, the quiet rhythm that reminds him that even time can sleep. When Finn wanders through the deep forests of or the long abandoned corridors of ancient ruins, he begins to notice something extraordinary. The world responds to his presence as if acknowledging that he too is part of this rhythm. Leaves seem to pause in mid-air before settling gently back to the ground. Streams ripple in patterns that mirror the cadence of his footsteps. Even the creatures, small birds, wandering snails, the occasional ghostly figure of someone lost, move in a quiet sync with the world around him. Time here is not strict. It is conversational, intimate, and alive. In one valley, shaded by towering obsidian cliffs, Finn came across a field of flowers that glowed faintly in the evening light. They swayed not with the wind, but with a rhythm that felt tied to the past, as if the field remembered the laughter of children who had once run through it, centuries ago. He knelt, pressing a hand against the petals, and felt the pulse beneath them, a steady, gentle thrum that carried the weight of memories long forgotten. The sensation was not heavy, it was comforting, a reminder that even in the aftermath of devastation, life could retain fragments of joy and stillness. Jake watched Finn closely, sensing the change in him when he entered these places. "You hear it, don't you?" Jake asked softly, his voice low and careful. "The world, it's alive differently here, like it's breathing." Finn nodded without speaking. Words would have been clumsy, incapable of capturing the subtle intimacy of the experience. He could feel the echoes of centuries reverberating in the soil, the stone, and the air itself. Time was learning to sleep, and he was witnessing the lesson firsthand. The lessons were quiet. A leaf falling too slowly, a stream hesitating over stone, a shadow lingering longer than it should. Every small pause whispered of patience, of a universe that had learned that rushing is not always necessary, that rest can be just as vital as motion. He remembered the first time he had truly understood it, wandering through a ruined clock tower on a cold night. The hands of the clock had stopped, yet he could hear the faintest tick beneath the walls, a pulse not of gears, but of something older. The tick matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat, slow and steady. For a long time, he simply sat on the stone floor, letting the pulse fill the tower, feeling that the world itself was breathing in tandem with him. That night, he had slept there, and when he woke, it was as if the tower itself had exhaled, carrying him gently back into the land above. These experiences taught Finn that time in was no longer a straight arrow. It was fluid, layered, and capable of pause. He began to see how the echoes of the past and the frozen seconds, the dreaming ruins, the remnants of the mushroom war all played a role in teaching the world this new way of existing. Time had learned that it could hold, that it could stretch, that it could rest without vanishing. And the land, the creatures, Even the magic that permeated everything had learned to move within this gentle embrace. In the quiet hours before dawn, Finn often reflects on this as he watches the first light brush the edges of mountains or glint off the glass shards of ancient ruins. He imagines the voices that once belonged to the people of the old world, faintly laughing, whispering, working and creating. They are not trapped exactly. They are resting, folded into the layers of existence, teaching the present that patience is as vital as progress, that stillness is as meaningful as motion. Princess Bubblegum had once suggested that perhaps this is why the world of Ooh is so strange and magical. Its peculiar laws, its unpredictable landscapes, its living, breathing oddities, all may stem from a land where time learned to pause, to dream, and to fold upon itself. The war had fractured reality, yes, but from that fracture, the world had learned a gentleness, a capacity to hold itself with care, to allow growth and change at its own pace. Finn understood now that this was not only a lesson for the land. It was a lesson for him, for Jake, and for everyone who wandered through Ooh. The world could be harsh, unpredictable, and at times devastating, yet it still held space for patience, for rest, for quiet reflection. Time itself, once relentless and unforgiving, had discovered the beauty of pause. And in that discovery, Finn felt a profound sense of comfort. He knew that even when shadows of the past pressed against the present, even when echoes of the Mushroom War whispered through ruins or dreamscapes, the world had learned to breathe. It was learning to sleep, to fold the past gently beneath the present, and to carry the future forward with a soft, steady pulse. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of soft amber and deep lavender, Finn felt a rare stillness settle over him. The land of Ooh, with all its fractured memories and echoes of old worlds, seemed to breathe alongside him. Even the wind softened, whispering through the treetops and across the sand with a rhythm that felt almost tender. Every shadow seemed to linger a little longer, every ripple in the water held in a gentle pause, as if the world itself had learned that it could rest without losing its way. Finn wandered through the edges of an abandoned forest, where twisted trees held faint glows of bioluminescent moss. He ran his fingers along the bark of a particularly large tree, noticing tiny cracks that pulsed with an almost imperceptible light. These were not merely marks of decay, he realized. They were traces of the past, remnants of lives long gone, folded into the living skin of the land. Each pulse carried a story, a moment preserved, a memory allowed to breathe and stretch, like a slow exhale. He remembered the clock tower, the dreaming ruins, and the frozen seconds that had once haunted him. But now, in the quiet of the forest, he understood that they were not haunting at all. They were resting, gently, patiently, and he felt that their stillness was a gift, a lesson in the rhythm of time, a reminder that even the most fractured world can find moments of peace. Jake, sprawled lazily on a soft bed of moss, murmured in his sleep about ghosts and echoes, but Finn only smiled. The ruins, the echoes, the frozen moments. They weren't ghosts seeking to frighten. They were teachers, guiding the living through a landscape of memory and possibility. They had learned to pause, to breathe, and now so could Finn. As darkness crept across the horizon, the stars began to awaken. They didn't burn with the harsh, impatient light of the sun, but shimmered softly. A gentle choir scattered across the sky. Finn lay back on the forest floor, letting the cool moss cushion him, and he could feel the pulse of the world beneath him. It was slow, calm, and rhythmic, as if time itself had curled into a quiet slumber. He imagined the echoes of the old world moving within that slumber, the figures in the ruins, the scientists and children, the laughter and the whispered warnings. They drifted through the layers of existence, held safely within the folds of time that had learned to sleep. The moments were preserved, not frozen in fear, but resting in patience, carrying with them the gentle wisdom that comes only from stillness. Finn thought about the lessons of the Mushroom War, the war that froze the clocks, the cities that remembered themselves, and the ruins that still dreamed. He realized that all these echoes, all these fragments of the past, had taught him a vital truth, that the world, even when fractured and scarred, continues to heal, to breathe, and to teach. Time is not merely a measure of motion. It is a companion, capable of rest, reflection, and quiet wonder. He imagined the rivers flowing lazily through the land, the trees stretching upward without hurry, the creatures of ooh moving in their own gentle rhythms. Each moment, each heartbeat, was a quiet, miracle evidence that even after devastation, life learns to fold its past gently into the present, allowing for healing and hope. Finn closed his eyes, letting the world's soft pulse wash over him. He felt the echoes of the dreaming ruins, the whispers of frozen seconds, and the rhythm of the forest beneath him all mingle into a lullaby of time itself. Every heartbeat, every breath, was a reminder that the past need not weigh heavily, the present need not rush, and the future could be welcomed softly, patiently, with care. And in that awareness, Finn drifted into sleep, not with fear or regret, but with the comfort of knowing that time itself had learned the gentle art of rest. In ooh, the echoes of the past and the heartbeat of the present coexisted, teaching even the youngest adventurer that there is wisdom in stillness, peace in pause, and wonder in the quiet flow of existence. So as the stars shimmer overhead and the land exhales softly beneath the moon, remember that even the world itself can rest, and in its rest, it holds us all. Good night.